Part 4. On Friday, the day of the dreaded Wembley performance, Heath's response finally came to Mr. Fenn Davies. Regarding your inquiry, I ask you to first reflect on last Thursday's consultation. Did I not caution you, Mr. Davies? You have the gumption to succeed, but perhaps not the persona, not the pretty bow to wrap around your talent. I imagine you have written to me out of fear. I see no mention of your legal friend. Are you afraid to talk to him? Afraid that you might find yourself speaking to a man you hardly recognize? Fortunately for you, there is an unwritten termination clause. But I am a man of business. First and foremost, Mr. Davies, I seek only to safeguard my interests. Therefore, you will attend the show at Wembley Stadium tonight. I will find you, and we will discuss the termination of your contract. But there is still a performance scheduled to happen. And happen it must. Signed, Mr. Heath Brandon. You have a friend who could get you out of this mess? Gina asked as she read the letter after me. I shook my head. Paul's not Paul anymore. I opened my phone and read his most recent message. Fenn, talk, Fenn, talk. I have to meet Heath, I said. Have to hope that he'll give me a way out of this. Do you want me to come? She murmured. I shook my head again. I'm going to London, Gina. It's too far, too dangerous. You've done so much for me already. You need to wait here. Wait until things look a little more normal again. Gina nodded sheepishly, seemingly embarrassed that she offered. I thought for a moment about the prettiness of her flushed cheeks, realized that I probably would have asked her out to coffee under different circumstances. We might have got along had it not been for the awfulness of that night at the Ritz, but none of that would matter by the end of that Friday 10th of November. I bumped into her again, months later, but she didn't recognize me. Much like everyone else, she didn't remember the true horrors of November. I did not contact my chauffeur to take me to London, did not contact anyone, did not respond to the hundreds upon hundreds of messages from my loved ones, who were no longer my loved ones at all. Messages from my mother and father, Paul people, who had been assimilated by some homogenous thing that sought only to consume me, sought to assimilate me too. I had to undo everything and bring my loved ones back. Had to bring everyone back, donning a low-effort but effective disguise of a hooded jacket and a pair of Gina's sunglasses. I boarded a train from Manchester to London. No passengers recognized me, but my skin tightened as I overheard one particular conversation. You love Fenn, don't you? One girl asked. I do, her friend replied. Good, the first girl whispered. Sarah didn't love him. No, she didn't. The second girl coldly said Sarah's quiet now. The first girl said yes. The second girl agreed Sarah's quiet. In the reflection of my window, I squinted at the two girls who appeared to be in their late teens. They sat across the aisle from me, horrifyingly close, close enough for me to see their eyeballs tumbling backwards, spinning towards their upper eyelids. Much like Heath Brandon, each girl was left with only the very edge of their pupils on display. And that felt more horrible than their eyes, showing only the whites. Still seeing the faintest sliver of those brown pupils was far, far worse. I wish I'd turned away from the reflection sooner. Wish I hadn't seen something emerge from the first girl's mouth. Not a tongue, as I'd expected, but an index finger. The appendage tried to escape, but it was swiftly swallowed by the girl. And then, as I clasped my mouth to stifle a scream, I saw her left eye momentarily slide to the side of the socket. It revealed a second eyeball vying to look out, but the girl tapped her temple to regain control. Her eyeball slid back into place, reclaiming the socket by pushing the second one away, pushing it into the back of her head. That 2-hour journey was both the shortest and longest trip of my life. Time and space did not exist in that disturbing land. I prayed that the hoodie and Gina's bulky glasses would distort my appearance, enough not to draw attention, for I knew without a doubt that the two girls were not the only deranged passengers on the train, and I certainly knew they wouldn't be the only ones outside the train. Navigating London was the greatest hurdle, a city of 9 million people. My subscriber count had hit 100 million on YouTube that morning. It was safe to say, given my rate of growth, that a high percentage of the city folk crossing my path belonged to Fenn's hungry pack of fans. My name echoed around the capital's packed streets, sometimes hushed and other times fanatically bellowed. I used the many bodies of London commuters and tourists to conceal my hooded form as I made my way across the city center. Then I found a bus that took me directly to Wembley Stadium, and I curled into a ball on the back row shrank and hid from the dozens of Fenn fanatics who were chattering around me. That chatter quickly devolved into nothingness, an endless stream of repeated words that had lost all meaning. I was thankful that the fans beside me did not attempt to start a conversation. I was certain that they would spot me if they were to give me even a moment's worth of attention. That journey journey felt endless, but I made it to Wembley with all limbs still firmly attached. We arrived on the top level of a multi-story car park around 6 in the evening. 1 hour before my show was set to begin, I waited for everyone else to depart the coach before I dared to stand, but I didn't hang around. I had an objective more vital than the all-consuming one I'd been pursuing for a decade. I was there to beg Heath for an end to this nightmare. As I exited the bus and made my way across the top story of the deserted structure, my chest started to pound. The fans had already vanished, and not being able to see the evil was terrifying. I felt like an exposed wound. For a beautiful moment, I wondered whether Heath had already worked his magic, wondered whether he'd already nullified my contract and made everybody forget me. The sound of clapping shattered that fantasy. I followed the growing roar of applause to the structure's top floor barrier, and one of Wembley Stadium's entrances came into view. There stood a crowd of thousands below the not-so-distant building, tens of thousands. From my elevated position, I spotted a slight clearing at the center of the crowd. Dozens of hands were hoisting something into the air, and by the time that something came into view, it was too late. Not something, but someone. It was the musician from my supporting act at the Ritz, the one who'd chastised the crowd for chanting over his performance. The frightened man's voice traveled hundreds of yards to my watching point from atop the multi-story car park. "Help!" he screamed. "Somebody!" The musician was shushed by thousands of whispering voices and fingers on lips. Then, the man's wriggling body was slotted not into the gaping jaws of one particular crowdgoer, but the fan's gaping eye socket. The musician's body slowly disappeared into the fan's very skull. The artist's fingers were the last to disappear. I wasn't sure how my eyes saw the horrific details from hundreds of yards away, but nothing from those days answered to the laws of logic. I wish, of course, that I hadn't seen each twitching extremity slip in the nothingness behind the fan's rolling eyeball. Just as I wish I hadn't recognized the man who had consumed the musician Paul. There must be a show. A voice spoke from behind me. I spun to see, illuminated by the faint glow of a nearby lamppost, the hunching figure I had met in the lobby of a recording studio. It had been little more than a week, but it felt like an age. "What have you done to me?" I croaked. I considered lunging forward, but I was haunted by the figure's unnatural appearance. His body seemed to hide something. It seemed to be hunching not from poor posture, but a desire to conceal his true nature, to conceal whatever festered behind the whites of his eyes. His rolling pupils clearly saw something not above him, but within his head. I thought of the way Paul had absorbed the musician through his bulging eye socket. Thought of the fingers I'd seen crawl out of the girl's mouth on the train. I accepted the terrible truth I had already suspected. My fans were not simply killing people, but taking them away from the world. Sarah's quiet now. And those quiet folk, much like me, have been forgotten by all of you. "What have I done?" Heath asked icily. "I have done nothing to you." To them," I corrected. "What have you done to them?" "Only that to which you agreed." The man replied. His smile was worse than it had been in the lobby. Unlike the expressions of my many fans, Heath's grin did not simply convey some alien emotion that I struggled to place. It did not convey any emotion. "What are you?" I asked. "So many questions," he said, "but time is fleeting." "Fen, did you not want to discuss the termination of your contract?" "Is that possible?" I asked, struggling to believe that such a nightmare contract would come with an exit clause. "Yes," Heath nodded. "However, the show must continue. If I lose you, I must have another. I must have a performer to take your place." "Where am I supposed to find a performer?" I scoffed. The man handed over the clipboard, which held the contract that I signed 9 days earlier. Then he tapped a finger beside the line that contained my signature. "Cross out your name and find another to sign here." He explained. "That'll nullify the contract?" I asked. "These people will stop chasing me. They'll stop hurting others in my name. They will forget these 9 days entirely," Heath promised. I looked down at the contract, realizing that this was not an end to the horror. It was simply a fresh chapter. People were going to suffer under the banner of whichever big name would come after me, suffer a fate worse than death, suffer in prisons beyond the watchful, spinning eyes of the masses. They would be damned to spend a lifetime in oblivion for daring to question the will of the mob. "Heath," I began, looking up from the clipboard. The crooked man had, of course, blown away in the chilling autumnal breeze, vanished entirely from sight, and my eyes were pulled once again towards the barrier at the edge of the car park. Pulled not by noise, but rather the lack of noise. My gut swelled like a black balloon as I took timid steps forward, and it burst when I peered over the edge. The thousands upon thousands of fans waiting on Wembley's doorstep were all standing motionlessly. They had all turned around to stare directly up at the top of the car park. To stare directly at me, I understood the dread that had been burgeoning for days. This was the forest that had watched me from the album cover for The Land. The crowd was the forest that stretched far beyond the horizon, into the abyss. And I screamed when the people started to move, as I'd expected them to remain rooted to the ground, much like the trees. But they charged at an unearthly speed, moving rapidly towards the bottom story of the car park. I realized that I was trapped. There wasn't time to descend 3 stories and flee through the main entrance, not without meeting the wall of salivating fanatics. My eyes locked onto the man leading the pack, the man who had pushed his way to the forefront of the charge. It was Paul, and he, much like the others, did not look away from me as he sprinted forwards. 10 or 20,000 parasitic people cranked their heads backwards as they approached the bottom of the car park. They strained to keep their white, hungry eyes glued to the man above them. I finally willed my legs to run, though I did not expect to escape. I was simply after a quicker end. As I scurried down each level of the structure, following the white arrows on the tarmac, the roar of the crowd grew. The entire car park threatened to collapse under the weight of thundering feet, and I stopped on the mid-level, finding myself face to face with Paul. My friend had soared far ahead of the pack, and we eyed one another for several silent seconds. He wore a face cosmetically like that of my dear friend, but his expression did not belong to Paul. Gone was the class clown who had perched on my windowsill at 4 in the morning, thrown the window open, and drunkenly serenaded our campus with a looping rendition of Wonderwall. Gone was the braying laugh he'd unleashed as our fellow students begged him to either stop or perform any other song. Gone was my best friend. In his place was a rabid animal that showed no sign of slowing. Paul didn't even notice the clipboard in my trembling hands. Much like those university students, so many years earlier, my pleas were ignored. He barreled into me, sending me to the gravel fen. "Fen! Fen!" Paul repeated with labored breathing as a droplet of spittle hit my eye. "Paul, please," I begged, squirming beneath him as other fans approached. "I don't know what you and the others want from me, but we are you," he growled, pupils locking not onto me, but the top of his eyelids. Then, my friend's cheek pushed outwards, and the haunting outline of fingers reshaped his skin. The musician within Paul's skull fought to be freed. I closed my eyes and prepared to meet the same terrible end, prepared to join the mass, for we were all Fen YU. Paul asked I want it, I knew what he desired, and I knew that he shouldn't have it. I would have chosen death over sentencing my friend to the perils of fame, but that wasn't an option. Even the musician's horrible fate wasn't an option. It was clear to me that the crowd had planned something far worse. For their god to devour me wouldn't be enough, and I feared that unknown fate above all else. So I did a cowardly thing. "Fie, Paul," I cried as I reached towards the fallen clipboard beside me. "I've got it right here. You just have to sign, and then you'll be me." "You'll have." Paul startled me by quickly unpinning my body, rising to his feet, then snatching the clipboard from my quaking hands. And my old friend did not hesitate. Did not say a word, in fact. He simply snatched the pen, which was attached to the top of the board by a jangling chain, and etched his name beside my own, the one I'd crossed out. Paul signed the contract moments before the mob reached my body. Moments before I would have discovered what they had planned for me. The runners at the forefront of the crowd stopped, halting those behind them, and they were human for a fraction of a second. My old fans looked around in confusion, not knowing how they'd arrived at such a place. But then, they started to turn their rolling eyes towards my friend. Slowly, serenely, and soundlessly. Paul, one man whispered, "Paul, do you have a song for us?" Paul, give a girl painted, her calm demeanor on the verge of shifting back into one of struggling breathing. None of them saw me any longer. Their heads followed the new Messiah, who had risen like a phoenix from the ashes of my fetal form. I watched in fear as Paul's face changed too, as he became human again. It was a lasting transformation for him. His complexion turned pale, and his mouth opened to release not words, but a flesh-colored liquid which spilled onto the ground. It contained strips of fabric and shards of eyewear. The remnants of the musician, my friend clearly did not recall consuming fen. He asked, noticing me, "Are you? What did I? You have to find someone else." "Paul," I begged. "Find someone else to sign it, or they'll..." Before I had a chance to finish, my friend ran straight to the store's side door and used the staircase to flee. A staircase that, in my blind panic, I hadn't even considered as a potential exit route. It thankfully took a few seconds for the crowd to return to their fanatical state, but they wasted no time in pursuing Paul. And as that new wave of fandom hit the world, it caught me too. I know this because my memories of the next few days are foggy. That's how I know all records from Friday 10th November to Tuesday 14th of November must be false, much like the records from my 9 days of fame. I have no idea what truly happened during those 4 days of Paul's stardom, but I know that he did not find a new artist for Mr. Heath Brandon. My friend has been missing for 9 months, I fear, with near certainty that he met the fate which awaited me.